Okay, looks like this thing's working. Just quick one. I've been on a reading spree, so I was told that Yaki's Imperium was a white pill, and I needed that after Ravello P. Oliver's big old black pill. So some thoughts on that. Yaki, um, interesting guy. He seems to substitute for DNA or genetics or heredity this concept of racial soul, and in place of heredity and DNA, he just continuously uses these amorphous terms that just keep on being ambiguous and meaning different things that kind of morph into one thing depending on what he needs them to be. So instead of like DNA, he'll say soul, and instead of saying heredity, he'll say substance. And he literally paraphrases Lysenko, who was the I believe Jewish, the Soviet chief guy in charge of agricultural research and genetic research, whose mandate it was to prove that environment determines everything. So if you plant summer wheat in a winter, it'll become winter wheat, and if you plant winter wheat in the summer, it'll become summer wheat. So he literally says that the soil is magical in his book. So just some quick disclaimers on that. Ravello P. Oliver's criticisms of Yaki are pretty spot on too. That having been said, Yaki's analysis of cultural subversion and internal enemies is spot on, very good. He almost names the Jew. Um, the only time he refers to the Jews is when he says that they became a race because of their religion, which, DNA testing, if it had been around in his time, 170 IQ or not, you can't just make stuff up. And so he literally did Soviet environmentalism, which is, there's no such thing as biological anthropology and magic. Soil is the name of the game. So, interesting stuff. What else was I going to say? Apparently, YouTube left me streaming for like 24 hours after last night's stream. I did a brief one where I was extremely black-pilled after finishing Ravello P. Oliver's book. Just some reasons for the black pills is just... Oh, let me turn off the water pressure. No, that wasn't an MG42. That was that's my water pump. Basically, Ravello P. Oliver revealed that there were a few dozen times where people thought that the Jews had just out-Jewed themselves and that they were going to get in trouble for it. And yeah, basically, I see a lot of people saying, wow, the Jews have gotten themselves into trouble now. Like Kevin McDonald, to some extent, saying they've gotten themselves into trouble. And Ryan Dawson and a lot of others, people that I respect, have been saying, oh, yeah, they're in trouble now. And they've been in much worse trouble without really the public waking up to them. So that was the reason for the black pill yesterday. Read Ravello P. Oliver. Very good analysis, especially if you like Yaki's Imperium. He kind of fills in the gaps where Yaki was weak. But yeah, Yaki's views on subversion are great. His views on culture are great. Tradition, etc., etc. He doesn't make a lot of sense, though. I kind of think Yaki was in the middle of some sort of breakdown where he abandoned his family and then moved to a small bay in Ireland and just wrote without any source material this stuff. He kind of, what's the term for it? No, quiet kitty. What the hell? Hypomania. It smacks of hypomania. But yeah, it's very it certainly is some lofty rhetoric in the verbal IQ on this guy. I mean, it's rumored he had a 170 IQ and that he was hunted by Jews. I'm not sure. I'll have to research the character more, but interesting stuff. Up until about page 220, 230, it was great, and then he got into Lysenkian, like a Soviet-style environmental determinism. Yeah, and so that was that's my criticism of Yaki. I'm not a big fan of Yaki. I think he also, a lot of his logic is tautological and circular. So, great rhetoric though. But I often used to watch Richard Spencer and be like, where is he getting this rhetoric from? And he some of his speeches seem like block quote paraphrasings from Yaki's Imperium. um, but yeah, Yaki is good with the cultural stuff, but he believes in magic soil. Other than that, just some quick updates. I'm finishing up my semester at school. I think this is going to be my last semester at school. It's been strange going to a community college and um, going around Berkeley and San Francisco and Albany, and you know, it, where during the end of the last election, I was getting a lot of threat and stuff. No one has really messed with me in months, and I just kind of just like waiting for someone to come up and say something to me. And so far at my college, only one, and I'm doing my college just for my GI Bill. I was on the verge of defaulting on some debt, so I had to do my GI Bill. Um, Only one guy's called me out on who I am, and it's been strange, almost just going to school. And there are some people that know. I know there's a professor that knows that I know. We actually got into a debate about culture of critique. I actually got one professor to call. Oh, what the hell was his name? There's a Jewish controlled op guy, and I got him to call him controlled opposition for quoting him on what he had to say about the media. I got him to call him an anti-Semite, which was funny because um, the guy I was talking about was controlled opposition. What the hell was his name? I can't remember it. Anyhow, that's about it. Let's see. So, yeah, I'm going to be hitting the road this summer, and I might have company with me. I've had some offers to do driver and do camera work and stuff. I don't know how much of that is is a solid offer, but it's going to be interesting. We're going to go around naming the Jew military bases, USS Liberty, Lavon Affair, New Mech facility, Israeli involvement in 9/11. We're going to be hammering that stuff home. I'm going to be talking about white civil rights and white genocide and stuff too, if the audience is receptive. But I'm mostly going to focus on propaganda about Jews. And so the propaganda about Jews, it needs to be like there's a hierarchy of what's the word? A hierarchy of motivation. So at the highest levels, people should be motivated by logic and reason and an understanding of historiography or the study of history. And looking at the Jews as a predator group, a parasitical group, over the last few thousand years, and their apex they've achieved now in power. You have to be able to communicate this thousands of pages of research, this comprehensive understanding of Jewish predation and parasitism. And so I'm going to have to start forming propaganda, which memes are great propaganda and stuff, but I'm gonna have to come up with one-liners about Jews and 9/11 and Jews and the Lavon affair, Jews and stolen nuclear resources, etc., etc. But I'm going to make this campaign primarily about naming the Jew, because that's more inclusive. I'm all about inclusivity, and but at the same time, we're going to talk about white genocide and stuff too, and the Jewish role in it. But um, it's going to be a fun campaign. Um, I might not get quite as spicy as I got with some of the stuff I did for my LLC. Um, but yeah, we'll see if we can't get some protests going outside of Trump rallies. We're going to be protesting outside of Trump rallies, so I'm going to be going around in either the converted bus or the RV, and we're going to find campaign rallies that Trump is holding or Trump supporters are holding, and we're going to be holding signs like Trump is becoming Israel's whore. Israel first means America last. No more dead troops for Jewish wars, that type of stuff. So, you know, maybe if you have any ideas from stuff that Father Coughlin did or Charles Lindbergh or Henry Ford with their America First Committee, and they're being opposed to foreign intervention. Let me know if there are any good slogans we can bring back. Um, so Scott says talk to Dr. E. Michael Jones. Yeah, I'll talk to him at some point. I've got to read his books first, though. I'd like to read his book on sexual subversion because the Jews seem hyper-focused on making everything about sex and materialism, and E. Michael Jones seems to really hit the nail on the head with the excerpts I'm seeing from him. Let's see. I don't know what Zukor is. Anyhow. So Jorg Lopez says Yaki would be on our side today with knowledge of DNA. Yeah, well, and the thing is, after the Soviet Union began purging Jews from power, which I'm trying to figure out whether that was real or ostensible purging of Jews from power. Apparently, Yaki said that the Soviet Union was turned and saved. So actually, before I go, I think I will briefly read to you Yaki 11 Jews in Prague. There's something that Yaki wrote saying that Jewish control of Russia was over. So anyway, we got a link to the to an archive, Yaki 11 Jews in Prague or something like that. Francis Parker Yaki. Francis Yaki. I'll read that aloud to you guys real quick now. Yaki 11 Jews, Prague. You know we got a link to that? The Prague treason trial. I don't know why I suddenly can't find it anymore. Let me try. So Bing doesn't find it. Anyone got the name of that article by Yaki where he talks about Jewish power in the Soviet Union waning? Let's see. Alright, let's see. Yaki, 11 Jews, Prague. Let's see, maybe we can find this for you. Okay, here we go. Francis Parker Yaki. What is behind the hanging of 11 Jews in Prague? So this seems like good news. Seems like what we heard about the Jews getting rabid anti-Russian is justified. That the Russians actually looks like Yaki is saying they overthrew the Jews, and we're going to see if that's true with research. But I've had a lot of people tell me that it's true that the Russians were able to get the Jews out of power, at least until Yeltsin. So we're going to see if that's true with our own research. But I'm going to read to you what is behind the hanging of the 11 Jews in Prague by Francis Parker Yaki, published December 1952. Okay, let's read this right now. On Friday, November 27th, there burst upon the world an event which, though small in and of itself, will have gigantic repercussions in the happenings to come. It will have these repercussions because it will force a political reorientation in the minds of the European elite. The event was a conclusion of the treason trial of the Jews in Prague and their condemnation to death. During the years 1945 and 1946, the coalition Jewry Washington-Moscow functioned quite perfectly and frictionlessly. When the Israeli state was established as a result of armed Jewish aggression, and might I add as a parenthetical here, terrorism against the British and Americans, the entire world, dominated by Moscow and Washington, sang hymns of praise and congratulation. Washington recognized the new state de facto within hours of its proclaimed existence. Moscow outbid Washington in pro-Jewishness by giving de jure recognition, meaning like instantaneous. Both Washington and Moscow vied with one another, seeking to please Israel. Operetta state, the Israeli operetta state, I don't know what operetta is, and aided it by all means, moral and material. Russian diplomats boasted that at last, in Haifa, they had a warm water port. No, they now have a warm water port in Syria. But it looks like the tides turned on the Jews in Russia shortly after this, unless I'm wrong. According to was it, I forget who it was. There was someone I read that said that reports of Jews being removed from power in Russia in the 50s and 60s were greatly exaggerated. I'll have to come back to that. I'm looking into the matter. As president, I would have to deal with the Russians, and if they're anti-Jew, I'm going to be working very closely with them. So now, and now a few short year, and now after a few short years, Israel is recalling its ambassadors from Russian vassal states and intensifying its anti-Russian policy from its American citadel. Volatile Jews in Israel and America cry out that Stalin is following in the footsteps of Hitler. The entire American press boils with fury at anti-Semitism in Russia. Anti-Semitism, warns the New York Times, is one thing the Americans will not tolerate in the world. Why this bouleversement? Is the question posed by Yaki. No. I'm trying to remember. Was it Ravello? I think it might have been Ravello that said rumors of Jewish disempowerment in Russia were greatly exaggerated, and this was a way of the Jews to cry wolf on Russia as they had in the 1880s and 1890s to stir up the Americans into a conflict, just as a way to polarize the world and distract the world from Jewish power continuing to rule. So what I need to do is figure out whether or not this is real, whether or not Yaki's been tricked. So he goes on with why this bouleversement. I don't know what that means. B-O-U-L-E versement. I don't know what that is. It began early in 1947 with the Russian refusal to surrender a part of its sovereignty to the so-called United Nations for the purpose of control of the atomic weapon industry. Jewish statesmen, being materialistic in their metaphysics, believed strongly in the absolute military power of atomic weapons and considered it thus indispensable for the success of their policy that they control these weapons unconditionally. By the way, Jews are the ones that stole nuclear weapons for the Soviet Union, including in 1952 the hydrogen bomb. So this kind of contradicts what Yaki says, but you know, we're gonna keep an open mind here and hope that this is true, because if there's a nuclear armed superpower that's anti-Jew, that's half the battle. We're gonna figure out together, campaign supporters and your candidate, whether or not Russia truly has become anti-Jew. If it has, our work's halfway done. Anyhow, this control they already possessed in America through the Atomic Energy Commission. They're talking about supervision of the nuclear weapons arsenal, specifically created and constituted so that it is beyond the reach of Congress and responsible only to the President, who is, by the practical rules of American inner politics, an appointee of the cultural state, nation, people, race of the Jew. That is one hell of a hyphenated word there. Culture, state, nation, people, race of the Jew. That's kind of like saying, you know, the amorphous. It'll slip through your fingers. Call them a people. They say they're a religion. They say they're a religion. They go back to people, etc., etc. So they sought the same degree of control of atomic weapons in Russia and used the device of the United Nations to submit an ultimatum to the Russian leadership on the question. This was in the latter part of 1946, when the tide of atom worship was at its height in the minds of nearly all of the poor crop of statesmen who today conduct the political affairs of the world were fantastically dominated by a mere explosive bomb. A similar mania reigned for a short time after the invention of dynamite, after the invention of the machine gun, etc., etc. The Russian regime also believed in atoms with the same religious faith, and thus regarded the abdication of its atomic sovereignty as equivalent to the abdication of its entire sovereignty, which is true. Nowadays, if you don't have nukes, the Jews will just have other countries invade you, and you lose your sovereignty. Case in point, Iraq. Saddam should have develop nuclear weapons if he wanted to not be brutally murdered by Jews. Moving on. Thus, the Jewish-American ultimatum in late 1946 was rejected, and in early 1947, the preparation of the Third World War began. And this is 1952. Yaki thought there was another world war coming. And, there are also some terms he uses in his book Imperium that he sprinkles throughout here. This Russian refusal stymied the plans of the Jewish leadership, which aimed at a surrender of both Russian and American sovereignty to the United Nations, an instrumentality dominated by the Jewish culture, state, nation, people, race. There again is a super hyphenated five-word hyphen. Even supine, politically unconscious America could hardly be expected to give up its sovereignty when the only other world power unconditionally refused, and the entire policy had to be scrapped. And just some evidence pointing to perhaps that the Russians had become anti-Jew is that the Jews in America and the American press and the British press stopped referring to it as the Soviet and started referring to it as the Russians. So that is circumstantial evidence that the Russians had indeed to great extent removed the Jew from power in the Soviet Union. And they actually, Stalin killed a bunch of Jews that for treason. So whether or not Stalin was a quarter or half Jewish is rumored. I know all three of his wives were Jewish. He certainly, if he was Jewish, killed a lot of his own people. So moving on here. Don't let that confuse you about the early Soviet Union, though. Prior to Stalin, the Soviet Union did nothing but kill white Christians. And especially the blondes. The Jews killed pretty much everyone that was blonde in Russia. Like the people that are blonde in Russia today are people that recessively carried the blonde genes. The Jews hunted down and killed redheads and blondes with just like they did during the French Revolution of the 1790s. Another name for the Reign of Terror was the slaughter and the massacre of the blondes. The Jews, after they killed their useful idiots like Robespierre and the Duc d'Orleans, proceeded to massacre all of the Germanic-looking people in France. Just wholesale genocide of blondes. Jews are vicious. And I feel bad for any of you that are blonde or have blonde children in any of these countries that are really starting to turn, where the Jews have established a majority non-white replacement population within the last 3 or 4 generations, where they're inciting all of these replacement people against whites. Don't blame the replacements, blame the replacers and the people inciting them against you. They're going to kill the blondes and the redheads first. That's what the Jews always do. Moving on. The next policy of the Jewish leadership was to persuade the Stalin regime by the encirclement and pressure of the Cold War that it was hopeless to resist. The same tactic was used against the regime of Adolf Hitler from 1933 until 1936, when war was decided upon at the earliest feasible moment. And actually, he said 1933 to 1936. The Jews had decided on war with Germany already in 1933, when Judea declared war on Germany. That was Samuel Untermyer after some sort of Jew conference in either Holland or Switzerland. It's like, yeah, all the Germans need to be exterminated because they have removed us from the control of the media and their banks. This is unforgivable. It's a Holocaust. Moving on. Because of the Russian rejection of the atomic weapon ultimatum, Russia now found its policy opposed everywhere. In Austria, in Germany, in Korea, in Finland. Those same American publicists who had become so deft at explaining Russia's need for security as Russia seized one landscape after another, suddenly turned against the accusation of the aggressor. So basically they're saying the Jews had been clapping in the media as the Soviet Union expanded right up to half, Eastern Germany and right up to the border with Austria. And then suddenly, in the late 1940s, either by trick or for real reason, they started saying the Russians are bad, they're persecuting Jews. Now, the Jews have screamed out in pain as they kill people in the past, like in the 1870s to 1890s, they told America, oh, the Russians have been doing terrible stuff when the Tsar and the aristocracy had done nothing but protect the Jews from vengeful peasants. So this could be more of the same. And the fact that I'm having such a hard time figuring out whether or not Jews were actually being removed from power is just testament to how thorough I'm being before declaring one way or the other whether or not Jews were actually removed from power there. This is the whole subject of the whole falling out I had with a lot of the GDL guys. Is I wouldn't condemn Russia as a Jew puppet state because I didn't know. Like, I'm holding out hope that Russia is actually anti-Jew, and we're going to figure that out. You know, let's be like the State Department or a non-Jewish controlled CIA and analyze the power structure of a foreign country from about 1945 on with Russia. Help me figure out whether or not the Jews still have a lot of sway in the Russian government, whether or not this is all just them doing a recreation of the 1870s to 1890s. Oh my God, we're being pogromed! Screams that they were doing about Russia here in the U.S. Moving on. So basically, apparently all of the countries in the world, including America, then were starting to really turn on Russia because they wouldn't submit to nuclear weapons inspections and stuff. So those same American publicists who had become so deft at explaining Russia's need for security as Russia seized one landscape after another suddenly turned against Russia with the accusation of aggressor. The faithful servant Russians in the West, like Truman, Oxon, Churchill, Attlee, Gall, and the rest, became suddenly, almost, anti-Russian. Naturally, they did not use the same sort of language against Russia, the peace-loving democratic people of yesterday, that they had so used against Germany. And naturally, again, they did not yet use the language of unconditional surrender when it came to a military test in Korea. Although they had eagerly sought Russian aid against Germany, they did not now seek German aid against Russia. Actually, Morgenthau, the Jews had a big debate whether or not to completely exterminate the Germans. The Jews they settled on like 6 to 10 million, and I've seen numbers as high as 11 million Germans were killed by Jews after the war. It would have been higher, but we caught a bunch of Jews sneaking up to Hamburg and a few other cities, the water treatment plants, trying to slip poison into the water supplies of the cities. That's a real thing, by the way. I forget the name of that attempted mass slaughter of Germans with poison in the water, but it's something they actually tried in like 46. They did succeed in killing millions of Germans in death camps after World War II, but see Hellstorm or books by David Irving about that if you need more details on that. Anyhow. Jews accused the Germans of the Holocaust because Jews committed massive Holocaust before, during, and after World War II. There was no Holocaust of the Jews. It's a giant Jewish lie. Moving on. So they did not now seek German aid against Russia. That would be going too far, and it is one of the political weaknesses of the Jew that he is the victim of idea fixes. The leading obsession of the Jew is his unreasoning hatred of Germany, which, at the present stage of Europe's cultural evolution, means unreasoning hatred of Europe, which we're seeing today. You know, the Jews are trying to ethnically cleanse Europe of Europeans, which Europe is connected to Asia. It's not its own continent. The only reason Europe is called Europe because it has Europeans in it. It's not. They don't call it the European subcontinent like they do India. They call Europe Europe because it has a different race of people in it, and the Jews hate Europeans. Not every Jew, but 99% of them. They want us dead. They want us exterminated. And if you don't believe me, look at all of the open borders for all the white countries in the world. That's unparalleled anywhere else in the world except for maybe Tibet. Anyhow. So this could all just be this could all just be Jewish agitation saying Russia's now evil because we need you to go die in proxy wars against the Russians' proxies in Vietnam, Korea. Ravello P. Oliver and others said that all of the wars, Vietnam and Korea, were just ways of getting white men to die in foreign tundras and jungles. And, you know, it's arguable that MacArthur was dismissed because he was actually going to win the war in Korea that was needed as a meat grinder to kill as many young white men as possible. Anyhow, for several years, there have been grumblings and undertones in the American press against anti-Semitism in Russia, which I've heard both sides of this. Some people say this was real. Some people said this is just the Jews lying about pogroms again, just like in the 1890s. These dark mutterings began after the Russian rejection in late 1946 of the Jewish American ultimatum on the atomic weapons question. It was then that the Stalin regime began its inner policy of dropping its numerous Jews from the highest positions and working down to the lower positions. This is big if true. If you have any evidence of this, I need to see it. Send emails to pat@lowerrevolution.us if you have any of this Stalin purging Jews from the Soviet Union's power structure in 1946 and later. I need to see evidence of this. Please send me that info. Elastically, the Stalin regime tried all approaches to the Jewish leadership. It offered aid to Israel. It withdrew the offer and shut off immigration to Israel. It tried every policy, but still the Jewish American encirclement policy continued. Wooing the Arabs did not change the mood of the Jewish American leadership, nor did spurning the Arabs. The press campaign against Russia continued in America and all its European vassal states. Russia is anti-Semitic, thus thundering the American thus thundered the American press. And as political initiates know, this is the worst epithet in the American arsenal of political invective. As Eisenhower said, when accused by Truman of being an anti-Semite, Eisenhower responded, "How low can you get?" And calling Eisenhower an anti-Semite is nonsensical. Eisenhower was completely controlled by Jews. He was completely controlled by Jews in the British OSS during World War II. And Eisenhower obeyed his Jewish masters when he killed millions of German POWs after the war against the Geneva Convention in the Rhineland death camps. Many of them were killed by depriving them of water while putting them in front of a stream with fresh water and putting barbed wire between them and machine gunning any of the Germans that tried to go up to the water to drink. Eisenhower was a sick bastard. He should have been shot in the head by his own troops. Ike was a terrible, terrible fucking man. One of the worst people ever to occupy the White House in history. Complete traitor. Got millions of innocent men died because of him, and hundreds of thousands of our own troops. Terrible man. The treason trials in Bohemia are neither the beginning nor the end of a historical process. They are merely an unmistakable turning point. Henceforth, all must perforce, I don't know what that means, Perforce, perforce, let's look it up. Come on. And my shit's frozen. There we go. Perforce means by force of circumstances or necessity. Okay, well, there we go. The treason trials in Bohemia are neither the beginning nor the end of a historical process. They are merely an unmistakable turning point. Henceforth, all must perforce reorient their policy in view of the undeniable reshaping of the world situation. The ostrich policy is suicide. I don't know what the ostrich policy is. The talk of defense against Bolshevism belongs now to yesterday, as does the nonsense of talking of the, quote, defense of Europe, at a period when every inch of European soil is dominated by the deadly enemies of Europe, those who seek its political, cultural, historical extinction at all costs. And the Jewish deep state of the United States, if not removed from power, will continue to have Jewish deep state enforcement of white genocide in Europe. Without the Jewish deep state having our troops as mercenaries in places like Ramstein and Landstein, military bases in Germany, the Germans would have long rejected the replacement populations, and they would have stopped having these stupid Holocaust laws. We're not allowed to question whether or not 6 million Jews were dumped into ovens at Six Flags Auschwitz by roller coasters and all that happy shit. Europe is suffering right now from the Jewish deep state, almost as probably worse even than American whites are suffering from the Jewish deep state. Things are going to get real bad in Europe if these Jews aren't removed from power in the United States, like tomorrow. Anyhow, so Yaki is calling out white genocide big time. He's saying in 1952 that there's a plan to exterminate all, that the Jews of America and formerly the Jews of the Soviet Union before Stalin started purging them planned on to exterminate all white Europeans from Europe. And this was also the Jew Morgenthau, who was the dictator of the U.S. wartime economy, and also that Jew, what the fuck was his name? A bunch of Jews wrote articles about the need to exterminate all whites. And basically, this is Yaki is spot on here when he says the Jews were planning on genocide in Europe. You're seeing it coming to fruition now with Israel and other Jewish organizations just pumping Europe full of the vilest replacement population they can turn up. They literally go around handing out Swedish porn mags in like drug dealing capitals of the third world, saying, "Go to Sweden. These women are whores. Rape them. They're demand to be raped." They have testimonies of Africans in Sweden saying, "Yeah, we came here for the women. The Jews said these women were looking to get some drugs and be raped." I actually know a guy that went to Sweden and talked to some of these Africans. Like the Jews were literally like hook-nosed Jews were in African villages looking for people that looked like they were addicted to what's that root you chew that's like cocaine in effect. They were looking for guys that looked like they were addicted to that, and like giving them porn magazines of German or Swedish porn, saying these women are waiting for you. Here's like $1,000 or $2,000 for the human smugglers to get you there. This is a note. I also know people from Austria and Italy and Germany that have said they all showed up with the same exact cell phone that the Jews had given them. Some cheap like Alcatel type thing. Moving on. That same barbaric despotism called the Russian Empire and presided over by the fat peasant Stalin, uh, whose real name is Jugashvili, it's a Georgian name, who rules by his cunning a Khanate greater than all those gathered today together by the mighty Genghis. He is today one of here. Let me start that over. So Stalin, real name Jugashvili, who rules by his running a Khanate greater than all those gathered together by the mighty Genghis, is today the only obstacle to the domination of the entire earth by the instrumentality called United Nations. The vast Russian Empire was created by the Jewish American hatred of Europe and Germany, and that's true. Jacob Schiff funded the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 and personally funded the genocide of dozens of millions of white Europeans. This was funded out of a Jew bank in New York called Kuhn Loeb & Co. that Jacob Schiff was the head of. The first major remittances of money from the Soviet Union using the stolen grain harvests as the collateral to sell to give the payback to Kuhn Loeb & Co. These were the first major transactions of the Soviet Union. This peasants being stripped of their grain right before winter and sold and exported and sold so that the Jews of New York could be paid back for their financing of the Red Terror Revolution of Russia. Don't believe me? Look at the Jewish World Encyclopedia. The Jews admit it. They brag about it in their own magazines, and you need to start reading their stuff. So basically, Yaki is saying the Jews created this and armed it using American money, and then the Soviet Union, now called Russia, starting in the late 40s, removed the Jew from power. And this is huge if true. This is huge. Um, it's all going to be almost impossible to win if this isn't true. Moving on. During the Second World War, in order to prevent Stalin and his pan-Slav nationalist religious entourage from concluding peace with Europe, Germany, the Jewish American leadership gave Russian military equipment in unheard of masses and political promises, gifts, and advantages with unheard of largesse. So basically, they tried to bribe Stalin with massive amounts of additional aid right after the conclusion of World War II, trying to get him not to be pan-Slavic and nationalistic. This is huge if true. If you're Russian, reach out to me. I need to know about this stuff. With the 14,795 airplanes, 375,883 trucks and 7,056 tanks given it by America. Russia occupied all Eastern Europe for itself and advanced into Magdeburg, Weimar, and Vienna. Those are German cities, and Vienna is a German city. Just Austria is not technically part of the German Empire right now. The American Secretary of State Marshall acted consciously and openly as a Russian agent in undermining the Chiang regime in China and delivering quietly to Russian vassaldom a quarter of the world's population. And this is, of course, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt during World War II were arming the Jew-backed Bolsheviks of China, and they eventually, after Franklin's death, the Jewish deep state, and with kind of a public spokesman of what was her name? The female Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, went around telling the U.S. and college campuses, "Yeah, Mao's an agrarian reformer. He's the George Washington of China." Anyhow, I think us changing our policy towards China and trying to make China anti-Russian in the 70s, that falls in with the narrative that Yaki's giving here, that Russia actually became anti-Jew. This is huge if true. And by the way, there was a guy from the GDL that kept on harassing me for not calling Putin a slave to the Jews. This is me doing my research, trying to figure out what's going on in Russia. So, you want to have the debate on Dugin in like a few months? We'll do that. We'll do that. But let me finish. I'm at like 1950 right now with my research. I need to get to like 1990 and figure out how Yeltsin let the Jews back into power, if the Jews were really out of power before that, and whether or not, if after Yeltsin, the Jews have been removed from power a second time. Studying, learning, true history, true history is knowledge of history with respect to where the Jews were at. So, delivering quietly into Russian vassaldom a quarter of the world's population. It was only later that this conduct of Marshall seemed reprehensible. At the time, he was regarded as a distinguished diplomat like Churchill and Roosevelt at Tehran, and was decorated for his service to Russia. So apparently before Jews were removed from power in Russia, service to what was referred to then as the Soviet, or the Russian democracy, was the highest virtue, because it was still Jews in control back then. If this ostensible thing of Russia having removed its Jews from power in 1946 is true. The epoch marked by the trials in Prague is not absolute. Russian papers still explain that the Jews condemned to death for sacrificing the interests of Bohemia to the interests of Jewry were enemies of the Jewish people. Huh. So this would be equivalent to us not making a big deal out of the fact that the Rosenbergs in that same year had been Jews, the ones that stole the hydrogen bomb and gave it to the Soviet. Which, if the Soviet Union, or as they're calling it here, Russia now, truly had become anti-Jew, why were the Jews still spying so heavily for the Soviet Union? Like 80 or 90% of the spies for the Soviet Union between like 1950 and 1989 were Jews. So, still figuring it out. The American Jewish Committee takes the same line, so that the people elsewhere in the world, in places like America and its English appanage, I guess that's like appendages, will not develop the idea that it would be even possible for a Jew holding public office in a host country to behave like a Jew and not like a loyal member of the host country. Yeah, and this reminds me of all like the Jews posting bacon memes on Facebook and stuff, like your Robert Spencer's, your Pamela Geller's, draw a picture of the cartoon Mohammed. We're the true American patriots. Moving on. The American Jewish Committee, however, gives no explanation whatever, not even in mere words, of what possible reason Russia would have for charging loyal Russian subjects with sacrificing Russian interests to Israeli interests. They give us no clue. Apparently, they would have the world believe that the canny peasant regime of Stalin is embarking on entirely unmotivated adventures in the same realm of world politics which destroyed the political power of National Socialist Europe, the power of the Jewish culture, state, nation, people, race. Once again, this 5-word hyphen from Yaki. Jewish culture, state, nation, people, race. He must mean that as a joke. Let's see. And by the way, Yaki's not kidding there. If you read Hitler's Revolution, which I read to you on my 2 campaign channels, all but the last chapter, the audiobook I made for you, Europe became united under National Socialist Germany, and there were over 1 million volunteers, I think from Russia alone, Cossacks, that all at the end of the war were turned over to be slaughtered by the Soviets. But the Germans had millions of non-Germans fight on their side because they knew that if the Jews won World War II, that what's happening now in Europe now with white genocide would happen. They knew it then, and they fought almost to the last man to stop it. It's a shame that the Jews killed General Patton because he knew too, and he was going to come back to America and fight them. The Jews killed Patton the day before he was flying back to the U.S. to fight the Jews here. He was going to name the Jew here, according to his letters home. The question of guilt or innocence in these or any other political trials, like the stinking horror of Nuremberg, which were Jewish show trials, Jewish officers from the British Army and the U.S. Army and the Soviet Army came and just did show trials. These were witch trials in Nuremberg. They were persecuted and prosecuted post ipso facto or whatever. They like passed laws against stuff that had happened after they had already done it when it was legal at the time. They basically just invented new charges to make sure all the German leadership hung so that no one lived to tell the tale of the European liberation forces under National Socialist Germany that almost succeeded in toppling world Jewish tyranny. Like the stinking horror of Nuremberg, is historically meaningless. The Jewish victims in Prague, like the Rosenbergs in America, merely did not understand how late it was in the development of the Cold War. The fashion of yesterday of being pro-Russian in a word and act has changed. The Rosenbergs were not au courant. I think that's hip to like the modern trend. The Jewish officials in Prague also were living in yesterday and felt far more secure than they were. In 1952, they behaved as though they were still in 1945. If anyone who knows the simple meaning of the word, he made a typo here. If anyone who knows the simple meaning of the word politics knows, he said the meaning of the world politics. The word, and then in quotes, politics knows that these trials were not spontaneous outbreaks of race prejudice on the part of politically wide-awake Stalin and his power-hungry entourage. These men want power, and they will not attack on a front where, in the event of victory, no power could possibly be gained. This is a principle from his book saying that you do not go to war unless you gain power. And if you go to war and there's a military victory, but you have not increased your power, then that is a political loss, even if there's a military defeat. That's actually the best chapter from Yaki's book, where he goes into the nature of going to war for anything but your people's or your nation's interest, and winning militarily like England did with World War II, but losing then all of your power in the world. So going to war and winning militarily but having a net loss of power is like the highest sin you can commit against your military and your people, and that's exactly what happened to England. Anyhow, it's worth reading Imperium by Yaki, but he does have the Lysenko type Soviet environmentalist race isn't real type bullshit in there, which today he would have had to eat in his words, Yaki, if he hadn't killed himself in prison in San Francisco in 1960. The whole Human Genome Project and DNA stuff we do now just completely throws out all of that environmentalist bullshit. It says that there's no such thing as race. It's Jewish lies. And unfortunately, people were propagandized with those Jewish lies so much that a lot of them bought that Frankfurt School type of Boasian bullshit. Unfortunately, Yaki was able to see many things for what they were, but the Jewish lies tricked him with regards to race. Moving on. For 35 years, Stalin has been pro-Jewish in his inner and outer policy, and if he now changes, it is for well-considered reasons of state necessity. The same Jewish press, which says Stalin is anti-Semitic, says that his Jewish victims are enemies of the Jews. Strange. I don't know what to make of that. He'll explain it. If they really believed this of his victims, the trials show that Stalin is pro-Jewish, not that he is anti-Jewish. However, nothing is easier than to catch Jewish leaders in contradictions during these times when they are frantically realizing that perhaps their atomic ultimatum, their United Nations front against Russia, their Cold War encirclement of Russia, and their Korean War were gigantic blunders. Up to now, their objective within Russia has been to replace the Stalin regime, which the Jews consider as a traitor to the fundamental principle of Bolshevism, by a new Trotsky. And this is true, that Stalin did round up all of the Trotsky supporting Jews, and killed them. And Trotsky was a true Jewish Bolshevik. Trotsky wanted internationalism, didn't believe in borders, did not want anyone to be, even if it would cost military victories and stuff, he didn't want anyone having nationalism as a motivation. Trotsky was a dyed-in-the-wool internationalist, even more so than Soros. This was a die-hard genocide, all white people, there's no such thing as race, Jew, Trotsky. And Stalin killed all of his supporters. Just as they constantly hoped, and they were trying to replace Stalin with someone like Trotsky, who was the man responsible, along with the 85% Jewish secret police and 85% Jewish Soviet political commissarship of pre-World War II. The Soviet Union were responsible for the deaths of dozens of millions of white men and women and children. These were the most murderous Jews in history, and I think one of them is actually an ancestor of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of the high-up Jewish secret police, one of the death camps. Moving on. Just as they constantly hoped for an internal revolution in Germany, so they hoped for a revolution against Stalin, a revolution to return to Trotskyism and the fundamental principle of international Bolshevism, a revolution to wipe out religious pan-Slavic Russian nationalist imperialism, a revolution which would embrace the United Nations and bring about a Jewish millennium, a reunion of Baruch and Kaganovich. Bernard Baruch, I think he's referring to the Jew, he says Baruch, I think that's referring to Bernard Baruch, who was the Jew that stole the equivalent of trillions of dollars from the U.S. taxpayer during World War I when he was made the dictator of the U.S. economy, the same as the Jew Morgenthau was made dictator of all U.S. economic decisions and central planning during World War II in the United States. And bring about a Jewish millennium, a reunion of Baruch and Kaganovich. Kaganovich was a Jewish mass murderer in the Soviet Union prior to 1933, I believe. Of Lippmann and Ehrenberg. Lippmann was another genocidal Jew responsible, in part, or shared responsibility for the deaths of millions of white European men, women, and children. And Ehrenberg, Ehrenberg, of course, being the Jew in charge of propaganda that said rape and kill every German woman and child. He did the whole rape them 8 to 80 policy. And if you are not fighting the German army right now, go find and kill German civilians, women and children, and kill them, rape them to death, nail them to barns, which they did. Of Buttenweiser and Eisner, of Anna Palker and Anna Rosenberg, and these are the Jew traitors that these are the Jews that were responsible for the deaths of dozens of millions of white Christian Europeans in Russia, including women and children. By now, but now this hope had vanished. There is no way of bringing about the millennium by peaceful means, through coercion of Russia by Cold War and United Nations. It is possible now to record the developments which have been rendered inevitable by the clear break signified by the Prague trials. First and most important of all of the first and most important of all to those of us who believe in the liberation of Europe and what he refers to as the Imperium of Europe. He wanted like a pro-white European Union. This is the beginning of the end of the American hegemony of Europe, which I fucking hope that's true. The Jewish deep state needs to stop committing genocide against the Europeans in Europe. That's such a crime. So bad what's happening in Europe right now. The shoddy structure of the Morgenthau Plan, which was a plan to genocide all Germans, and the Marshall Plan of Schumann Marshall's plan was when Morgenthau's plan was causing resentment among non-Jewish people over deployed in Germany, among white people that saw the Jews committing genocide against the Germans. They had to implement the Marshall Plan because American GIs in Germany, occupying Germany, were waking up to the fact that Jews are genocidal maniacs. So they had to call off the Morgenthau Plan, which was the extermination of all Germans. The shoddy structure of the Morgenthau Plan and the Marshall Plan, of Schuman Plan and Strasbourg Plan, of the American flag flying over European capitals, of NATO, of the systematic subjugation and spoliation of Germany, of the satanic project of constructing a German army to fight Russia on behalf of the occupying Jewish American enemy, an army without a general staff, officered by Democrats and armed with the weapons of 1870, the whole prolonged democratic holiday of Churchill's, Gaul's, Spock's, Gesper's, Adenauer's, and Schumann's. So basically, they were going to give the Germans a bunch of archaic weapons and just have them do human waves against the Russians. For Europe, the Prague trials will act as a historical cathartic to flush out the historical waste matter of Churchill's and their liberal democratic communist dirt. And if you read Irving's book on Churchill, Churchill was in the employ of Jews from an early age. The Rothschilds bought him his first military full dress uniform during the Boer Wars in South Africa. Huge slave to the Jews. He's the one that made sure that Bolshevism got saved by the United States and kept England in the war long after England and Germany should have formed an alliance against Bolshevism. Churchill's essentially the Shabbos Goy who's responsible for World War II. If you have to blame World War II on one guy, it's Churchill. The American hegemony is doomed, and he means the Jewish deep state hegemony, is doomed because all Europe realizes with the start what imperium the proclamation of London and the front fighter have preached for years. And this Yaki kind of, he thought that he had started like a new Reich with the proclamation of London. It's in his book. That the power on whose behalf Europe is asked to fight Bolshevism is none other than the Jewish state, nation, people, race, the five-word hyphen that he keeps on throwing around. This entity, which itself is the historical creator and leader of political Bolshevism. So he's pretty much saying Bolshevism used to be in the Soviet Union, which has become Russia again because it's no longer Bolshevist, but through Jewish subversion now America is the center for cultural Marxism and Bolshevism, which, you know, we're doing like tranny kids and stuff now, which is true. The Jews have completely turned us into cultural Marxists here. Not me, but that's what they're preaching in the schools. I'm taking a class on constitutional law, and the whole class is about how do we get positive rights, which is like the Trotskyite Leninist constitution, where, you know, you have no protections from the government, no negative rights, which is what our Bill of Rights is. You only have positive rights, like a right to health care, a right for a free college education, etc., etc. We're completely Bolshevik now. It is obvious that the events which were strong enough to force Stalin to reorient his entire world policy and to become openly anti-Jewish will have the same effect on the elite of Europe. For the American hegemony to endure, and he means the Jewish deep state hegemony, it is necessary that the European elite be quite passive. It is of course quite impossible that the European elite would ever actively cooperate with primitive human material like McCloy, Truman, Acheson, and Eisenhower, and the Prague trials have gone off with an explosive roar to awaken this elite to the active resistance against the death plans being hatched for the European organism in Washington by the Jewish American leadership. And it's true. I mean, we're seeing right now uh, the 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 destruction of Europe by Jews that got rich off from stealing money from Americans. Pretty much the Jews used their bank bailouts here to commit genocide of white Europeans now, a few years after the bank bailouts. America cannot undo the Prague trials any more than Russia can. For these trials, from these trials, there is no going back. They are a war declaration by Russia on the Jewish American leadership, no matter whether or not the Russian press still wraps its explanations in the woolly words disclaiming anti-Semitism. And I've heard Eric Stryker say before that, like, the whole time that Stalin was lining up the Jews and executing them for treason, he was saying, "Oh no, we're not anti-Semites. Look, there's a goy here that we're executing too." What matters in politics above all, and not what one says, is not what one says, but what one does. The fact is, the Russian leadership is killing Jews for treason to Russia for service to the Jewish entity. This is big if true. Nothing can gainsay or reverse this fact. The European elite will perforce note, which is by means of force, note this fact and be governed accordingly. Russia has publicly, before the world, named its power enemy, and has thus removed all controversy on the question of who is the real power beneficiary of the American hegemony of Europe. And I wish that Yankee had focused more on trying to wake up Americans to Jewish control of the country, because Jews being in control of our country and putting Israel first is against the spirit of the founding of the country, which is the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the foreign entanglements. I feel like Yaki just throws Americans under the bus a little too much. I mean, Jews have such deep control of our media and our culture that it's really hard to blame white Americans for having been tricked into being slaves to the Jews. I mean, we can wake up. I mean, we just need to wake people up. And I think Yaki was focused too much on Europe. He should have focused on America too. In the dark days of 1945, many Europeans embraced the American occupation as the lesser of two evils. During the past 7 years, the comparative destructiveness of Russian barbarism and American Jewish Bolshevism have appeared in its true proportions, the proportions set forth in Imperium, Volume 2, a Russian occupation would be far less dangerous to Europe because of the abysmal cultural gulf between Russia and the West. The gulf would render impossible the erection of a vassal state system because there are no religious pan-Slavs in Europe, and the Russian barbarian leadership trusts no one else. The notion, fostered by wild American propaganda, that Russia could kill off the 250 million people of Europe need not be taken seriously. It is still a vile insult to European spiritual resources and masculinity, as well as being a historical nightmare and oriented, no doubt, in the brain of some American writer of science fantasy stories. Um, for political purposes, and increasingly for total cultural purposes, America is dominated absolutely by the culture, state, nation, people, race of the Jew. Once again, this 5-word hyphenated monstrosity, a hyphenated super word. Culture, state, nation, people, race of the Jew. God, it's funny. America and Europe appeals to all the forces of culture, retardation, and reaction. And it's gotten even worse since then. I mean, they've got tranny UK and cucked Sweden, cucked Germany. This is all a product of Jewish Hollywood and Jewish bastards and bitches like Barbara Lynn Spector. Europe has not yet learned to be multicultural. From the spiritual sewers of Europe, America can siphon up an endless number of Churchills to do its dirty work of dividing, despoiling, and destroying Europe in a suicidal war. So I guess this is what the Jews are trying to do in Ukraine. If Yankee's right here, then the Jews are still trying to do this against Russia. They tried to light up a tinderbox in Ukraine, where the rumor has it, I haven't seen the proof, that the Jews had Israeli snipers on rooftops shooting into protesters trying to get Western powers to intervene. in the name of human rights and democracy. Henceforth, the European elite can emerge more and more into affairs and will force the Jewish American leadership to render back step by step the custody of European destiny to Europe. Its best force is its natural organic leadership. If the Jewish American leaders refuse, the new leaders of Europe will threaten them with the Russian boogie. By thus playing off Russia against the Jewish American leadership, Europe can bring about its liberation, possibly even before the Third World War, which I think the Jews are still trying to push for a Third World War. Trying to do that. They tried to do the whole Russiagate thing. They false flagged a bunch of VPN attacks. When I was working at a startup, pretty much half of Silicon Valley servers went down because the Jews in Israel did a false flag attack right before the election, using VPNs to make it look like it was coming from Russia. They even shut down I think they shut down like half of Google's DNS servers, but it was Jews using VPNs in Russia. I said when they started getting the DDoS attacks on a lot of the infrastructure of the firm, I said, this isn't the Russians. This is bullshit. And this was before I was Jew woke. There was no reason why the Russians would just suddenly try and take down our DNS infrastructure in this country. Moving on. Henceforth, the European elite can emerge more and more into a... Oh yeah, I already read that. A second inevitable development from the turning point of the Prague trials is the intensification of the American diplomatic offensive against Russia, the Cold War. The press campaign will intensify in America and in Europe, and this is true. This is exactly what they did. So this has predictive power, so this makes what Yaki's saying more credible. Russia will become morally blacker and blacker. The American armament will be accelerated. This is true. It climaxed under Reagan. All potential Soviet agents will be liquidated by the United Nations. Russia will naturally retaliate. Today Pravda says Zionism is a tool of American imperialism. Tomorrow it will say American imperialism is a tool of Zionism. God, I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting for the Russian newspapers just to say that, and this will be proof. This will be the pudding that the proof's in. If the Russian media, number one, fires the Jewish head of RT Russia Today, the CEO is Jewish. They need to can all Jews from their media. And number two, they need to come out and just say, the American government is a whore of Israel. The American government is run by traitors to America that serve the Jews and Jewish international interests. At that point, we'll know that Russia's the real deal. I really don't want Russia to be controlled off, and I really hope I'm not projecting my hopes onto my analysis of the situation here. But I really think that Russia and Putin are the real deal. I really think they are anti-Jewish. I could be wrong. I'm still learning. A third inevitable development, the collapse of the American Jewish position in the Near East and throughout Islam. Since Russia will be unable to retreat from its anti-Jewish policy and the Jewish state, nation, people, race, once again that 5-word hyphen, from its anti-Russian policy, since for each one there is no other power opponent in the world. Oh, by the way, let me screen share this. Display capture. There. There. There's a URL for you. I'll put that in the chat for you. Come on. I gotta sleep more and read less, but I'm a man on a mission. There. Well, mission going on. There. There's a URL for you. I'll put that in there. Come on. Chat. Come on. There we go. There you go. Oh shit. Yeah. For you. Yeah, I just saw Lord Killjay comment saying he doesn't know whether or not Russia is anti-Jew or not, and it could just be another boogeyman that the Jews are trying to get us to go to war, where they're controlling both sides, like with the Napoleonic Wars. I don't know. I don't know. I'm hoping in one hand, and I'm trying to remove Jews from power in this country in the other. I'll put that. A third inevitable development, the collapse of the American position in the Near East and throughout Islam, since Russia will be unable to retreat from its anti-Jewish position and the Jewish state-nation people race from its anti-Russian policy, since for each one there is no other power opponent in the world. Russia will perforce ally itself with Islam, and Islam will perforce ally itself with Russia. God, I hope this holds true. And this whole Arab Spring thing could have been just a way of sabotaging Russian-Arab relations. Dark clouds of tragedy are gathering over the operetta state of Israel, with its 1 million population surrounded by a sea of 300 million Mohammedans, in whose I just saw Lord Killjay comment saying he doesn't by the brawn of its big whether or not Russia is anti-Jew or not. Still big, still stupid, still another boogeyman that the Jews are trying to get us to go to war. Give us some more controlling both sides, like with the Napoleonic. Some of us grew up being spoon-fed Jewish propaganda. I don't know. I thought I'm hoping in one hand, and I'm trying to remove Jews from power in this country in the other. The lackey is still big, still stupid, still ruling, inevitable, but he is 5,000 miles away, and the concern will grow graver in the Near East and throughout Islam, since Russia will be unable to retreat from its anti-Jewish position and the Jewish state-nation. I'm offering them Madagascar anti-Russian policy, since for each one there is no other power opponent in the world. Russia will perforce ally itself with Islam, and Islam will perforce ally itself with Russia. God, I hope this holds true. Fourth inevitable development, and this whole Arab weakening of the American position in Japan could have been just a way of sabotaging. And within a few years, it is quite possible that we will see the final expulsion of the American occupation troops from the operetta state of Israel, with its 1 million population surrounded. Even today, these troops are 300 million Mohammedans. I just saw Lord Killjay comment saying he doesn't by the brawn of its big whether or not Russia is anti-Jew or not. Big, still stupid, be another. We're not that tight. We're working on it. Give us some more controlling both sides. Didn't happen. Some of us grew up being spoon-fed. I don't know. Does that? I don't. Shit. I thought I was written in 1952. And there's a URL for it. I really hope that the lackey is still big, still stupid, still ruling. And many other developments 5,000 miles away, and the concern will head of the Kremlin position in the Near East. Some are regular Islam, for Russia will be unable to retreat from anti-Jewish position and the Jewish state. I'm offering them Madagascar anti-Russian policy. One thing is sure, since for each one there is no other war power opponent in the world, Russia will perforce ally itself with Islam, and Islam will perforce Russia declare war on the Jews. God, I hope they do. Fourth inevitable development, the power of Jewish weakening of the American position in Japan could have been just widespread. Within a few years, it is quite possible this is a term that the final expulsion of the American Jewish state nation of Israel widespread, with the leadership of 1 million population surrounded. Even today, these policies are ordered emotions rather than its intellectually. I just saw Lord Killjay comment saying he doesn't by the emotions rather whether or not Russia is anti. This is true. Big, stupid, together. We're not that tight. We're working on it. And that's why it's important to make both sides. Didn't happen. Some of us grew up being spoon-fed. I don't know. Does that? I don't. Shit. I thought I was written in 1952. And I'm trying to URL I really hope that the lackey is still big, still stupid, still ruling. Many other developments 5,000 miles away, and the concern will head of the Kremlin, such as its Near East. Some are regular Islam, for Russia will be unable to get attached to the Jewish position. I don't know if that's true. I think I'm offering them Madagascar anti-Russian. One thing is sure, since for each one there is no other war power opponent in the world, the trials of Russia will perforce ally itself with Islam, and vicious perforce Russia declare war on Russia. God, I hope they fourth inevitable development of power of Jewish weakening of the American position in Japan could have been just widespread. Within a few years, it is quite possible. This is a term used for expulsion of the American Jewish state nation of Israel widespread, with the leadership of 1 million population surrounded. Even today, these dread are ordered emotions rather than its intellectually. I just saw Lord Killjay comment saying he doesn't by the emotions rather whether or not Russia is. This is true.
and that's why it's important to make use of both sides. Didn't happen. Some of us grew up being I don't know does that. I don't shit. I thought it was written in 1952. It's faster to us. I really hope. Stupid. The lackey is still big, still stupid, still many other developments 5,000 miles away. Control to head creme such as it is silly. Some are regulars long or they get treated attached to the idea. I don't know if that's true. I think I'm all too absurd. One thing is sure, since free ones there is war, our to us here, trials of Russia. Is there one European alliance known as Islam response to Jewish declare war in Russia? The inevitable development of the Jewish weakening of the American nation. This is the Islam within a few years quite this is the term both from the Jewish state and Israel and the leadership of millions even today these notions rather than intellectually. Yeah, I just thought whether they are bulletins or rather whether this is true down the dark clouds and that's why it's important to make God I wish it didn't happen. Some of us grew up being spoon-fed. I don't know does that. I don't shit. I thought it was the first organ to warn you is fast extinction. Really hope the lackey is still big, still stupid, still and every other development is 5,000 miles away. The culture state such as it is silly and some are regulars long or just tell it Zionist occupied government. I don't know if that's true. I think I'm all too absurd. No European. One thing is sure. Since free ones there are 4 hours to us here. Trials of Russia. Is there one European alliance known as Islam response to Jewish declare war in Russia? The inevitable development this is the Islam have to consider a few years quite this is the term this means to become Jewish sovereignty and the leadership of million population even today these rather than intellectually. Yeah, I just thought whether they are bulletins or this is true down the dark clouds and that's why it's important there didn't happen. Some of us grew up I don't know does that. I don't shit. I thought it will be a first organ to war Europe is fast extinction. Really hope the lackey is still big, still stupid, still and every other development is 5,000 miles away. The culture state such as well. We did regulars long just tell it Zionist occupied government. I don't know if that's true. I'm all too absurd. No European. One thing is sure. Since free ones there are 4 hours to us here. Trials of Russia. Is there one European alliance known as Islam response to Jewish declare war in Russia? That's Yankees perspective. This is the Islam have to consider a few years quite this is the term this means to become Jewish sovereignty and the leadership of million population even today these rather than don't trust. Yeah, I just thought whether they are bulletins or this is true down the dark clouds and that's why it's still didn't happen. Some of us grew up I don't know does that. I don't shit. I thought it will be a war Europe is fast extinction. The lackey is still big, still stupid, still and every other development is 5,000 miles away. The culture such as it well. We did regulars long just tell it Zionist occupied government. I don't know if that's true. I'm all too absurd. No European. One thing is sure. Since free ones there are 4 hours to us here. Trials of Russia. Is there one European alliance known as Islam? Have a good night. Jewish declare war in Russia. That's Yankees perspective. This is the Islam have to consider a few years quite this is the term this means to become Jewish sovereignty and the leadership of million population even today these rather than don't trust. Yeah, I just thought whether they are bulletins or this is true down the dark clouds and that's why it's still didn't happen. Some of us grew up I don't know does that. I don't shit. I thought it will be a war Europe is fast extinction.